we were at outdoor swim meet for our son, and the swim meet was postponed because there was the sound of thunder way in the distance. You couldn't see the storm that was approaching because it was still pretty far away. But with the sound of thunder, the lifeguards postponed the meet. And my youngest son was getting pretty tired of sitting around waiting for things to get going. And so I took him back to the car, put him in the car, which is a really lucky thing in the end. Because soon after I did that, I didn't know what it was at the time, but everything around me just exploded. The bright white light and the sound of, you know how loud thunder can be, but if a bolt of lightning strikes right next to you, the sound is unbelievable. It's like a huge bomb, really. And again, at the time I didn't know it was lightning. All I knew was I was being electrocuted and didn't know why. And as many describe, time really slowed down. It was like in slow motion. I had enough time as I was being electrocuted to think to myself, well, but wait, I'm wearing rubber sandals. I should be insulated. I couldn't really look around. I was convulsing from the electricity. Actually, people saw me bouncing in the street. And I had enough awareness to know that if this electric shock continued, I wouldn't survive, but I couldn't do anything about it. And then it threw me, as often happens with lightning, and I landed on my head, and there's I'd say about 10 minutes sort of missing, where a huge storm arrived. There was hail, pouring rain, lightning, trees down. It actually took the ambulance over a half hour to come because the roads were impassable because of the storm. They got me eventually out of the gutter, out of the water, and into a car because I couldn't walk. I was partially paralyzed. And it wasn't until about 6 months later, and really struggling with the immune system problems, really bad chronic pain, especially short-term memory loss, and the trauma from having been electrocuted and coming very close to death, that I was regressed back to that experience to help process the trauma that was really hindering my ability to function in life. And it was during that regression where I recovered those missing minutes, where I was really unconscious. And the first part of the regression was a little bit scary because the trauma that was lodged in my body started to release, and in a way the body started to react as though it was being electrocuted again. I was shaking and bouncing. But it was in releasing that, letting it sort of pass through my body, that then I really recovered the memories from my near-death experience, where I could see my body on the ground laying dead and realizing, well, I'm not dead. I still have consciousness. I'm still aware. And I think that's something that some people believe, whether it's a religious belief or a more esoteric belief, that some part of our consciousness continues, or that we have a soul, or that we survive death in some way. We can read about it. We can listen to videos about it. Really, truly experience yourself as being alive and aware, even though your body is not, it's beyond transformational. It really is no longer a belief or a thought or a philosophy, but a knowing in yourself that something of me continues, even if my personality or my human body isn't alive anymore. And I think that's a big question that most or all of us really have or wonder about. And so that's not a question in my mind any longer, and it's not a belief. I think since I was young, I sort of thought that reincarnation made sense, but this is beyond something making sense. It's a knowing that I survive, I continue, I have a soul, I have a spiritual body or being that will survive this human body that's in this lifetime known as Paul. And I think that really changed my perspective about myself and about the world, right? And then after viewing the body like that, I moved away pretty quickly. I didn't have the experience of being met by a personified guide, as many people talk about, a loved one or a guide meeting them. But I did go into a light that gave me the experience of complete and total unconditional love. Again, I think it's a theory, something we strive for, but this was being bathed in complete and total unconditional love. And it's hard to have low self-esteem or self-criticism, or think of yourself as less than in some way if you feel so completely and totally embraced in unconditional love. That is something I think we all strive for or long for. But to experience it is so profound. And I like to think that I still carry some of that with me and can include that in part of how I live.
Does it persist afterwards? Do you have to work on it? Or is that knowing that you are loved just as you are, is that something that you're able to take forward with you?
Yeah, really good questions. Yes, it changes you, it changed me, and changed how I live, how I perceive myself and the world. And there's a difference, a kind of disparity between what I know on a soul level, on a higher consciousness level, and what I know as a human being. So after my experience, this greatly expanded experience, the freedom from the limitations of mental mind and human body, after experiencing unconditional love and total oneness with all, like we hear the phrase, we're all one. And again, you can understand the concept, but I experienced being all one, or part of all things. And so that changes you as well. But then, yes, once you're in the human body, and you have the human ego and the human personality and the qualities of the person, then I don't want to say you lose that, but it's harder to experience it fully. It's harder to live it. And I think that's one of the things that when you have a near-death experience that you strive for is to not just re-experience that oneness and that love, but to embody it, to live it. But we still have to struggle with our human personality and limitations. Yeah, it's much harder to think of myself as less than, but some part of my human personality from upbringing and family and culture, some of that still lives in me, and is something that I think we all struggle with in some way. But having this as a foundation or an inner knowing makes it much easier to deal with all of that.
I wanted to understand the trauma that the experience has left in you immediately afterwards.
Well, one of the most frustrating things was the short-term memory loss. I couldn't do the work that I do because I couldn't remember people's names or what they told me 5 or 10 minutes ago. And there was no way to recover it. You probably heard the story of me pulling into the gas station with my son in the car to put fuel in the car, and he looked at me funny and said, "What are you doing?" I said, "Well, I need to put petrol in the car." He looked at me and said, "You just went to the gas station and put petrol in the car. What are you talking about?" And so that was frustrating. You know, I've recovered from that. There was the physical pain of the trauma lodged in my body. I think that a lot of trauma work is about releasing not just remembering what happened, but releasing the stuck energy, right? The stuck pain, the stuck fear. When I was electrocuted, I, with all my being, fought that, tried to push it out of my body more or less, but it was overpowering. I had no ability to stop that, but it was in the resistance of it that it really lodged and got stuck in my body. And because of that, I had great pain in my back and difficulty walking after that. And it was in the regression that the regression therapist had me do the exact opposite of fighting that. He said, well, welcome it. I mean, it's very counterintuitive. It hurt like hell. But he said, no, welcome it. Welcome it into your body. Don't resist it. And because it was in the resistance that the trauma became lodged in my body. And I think that's a common element of difficulties after a traumatic experience, is that we resist it, we fight it naturally, but then it gets lodged or stuck in our body. And it's finding a way to reconnect with that, even though it's painful to look at that or feel that or remember that, and find a way then energetically to release it, whether it's by talking about it or by something physical, some physical way to release it. And so he helped me release that, and it was in the releasing of it and the welcoming of it, really, that the gifts of the near-death experience really came to me. And so I think that was a big lesson for me too. That's when I recovered the messages that I got while I was out of body. And those were so important for me to remember. Once I was back in physical body, I couldn't remember them. And I think this is one of the things that I've been really interested in exploring, is working with people that have had near-death experiences. And not everyone that's had a near-death experience remembers it. Sometimes the drugs that are administered, especially in heart attack cases or cardiac arrest, induce a kind of amnesia. And as we know from trauma study, that forgetting, not remembering, is one way a human being deals with great trauma. There's a kind of protective mechanism that causes us to forget. But in the remembering can be release of it and recalling or reclaiming the gifts and messages that we receive when we're out of body, when we're so-called dead. And so I was able to do a study in Canada with sudden cardiac arrest patients, along with a cardiologist that organized a group of his patients, and was able to regress them back to a few moments before their heart stopped and they were in time resuscitated with a defibrillator. And it was unbelievable, the stories that these people could tell about meeting loved ones in spirit, about the procedures that were done on their body while they were unconscious or clinically dead, as well as some of the things that happened. They were often in coma afterwards. They're not asleep, and they're not unaware. They can hear what you're saying. They know what's being done. One of the people was a nurse that was really angry about how they had treated her in the hospital and some of the jokes that they'd made about something. And she was able to recount and tell the doctors or the people that had done the procedure afterwards what they'd done and what she was upset about. So if you have a loved one that's been in coma or is in coma, know that they are quite aware. They just can't respond. They know what's happening. You can talk to them and they will hear you.
And if I understand this correctly, what you're saying is that they will often, during that time, connect with the other side as well. It's just difficult to remember it after we come back.
That's right. Some do and some don't, but it doesn't mean... But it's recoverable. You can go back there. You can go back through regression or meditation. It's like Eben Alexander, who wrote the book Proof of Heaven. After his experience, it was so amazing, so transformative. He spent years trying to get back to that state, not wanting to die, of course, but wanting to be in that expanded state. And he was able to tap into some of it through meditation. But I had the opportunity to regress him back to that time. And it was the most amazing NDE regression I've ever performed or conducted, because of the love he experienced, the expansiveness he experienced, and that blissful peace that he experienced really just filled the room when I did the session for him. And so it was really a gift for me to conduct that session, but also for him to finally be able to achieve that state once again without the traumatic part, without the getting killed part, or the dying part.
So you were able to recall the messages that you received while you were out of your body. What were those messages?
So, of course, one was first just knowing that we survive, that our body may die, but we continue to live and have consciousness. That was mind-blowing. Unconditional love, feeling so accepted, so okay, which is I hadn't experienced as a human being on earth. One of the messages I got, though, was listen. Okay, they said to me, you have a pretty good mind, but you're too dependent on it. You use it too much. You need to shift, and you need to listen. You need to listen with your heart and your soul. We will guide you. Open yourself more to spirit and listen. And I think that's been a guiding theme in my life ever since, because I think one of the common issues we have as human beings is we rely on our intelligence, on our intellect, and there's so much more to us than our intellect. We need it. It helps us function. Right? I appreciate how my mind works most of the time. But I had to realize and work with the fact that there's something much more to me. And when I began my more spiritual exploration, when I began my life between life regression work, both facilitating and doing it myself, my mental mind was really afraid. You could say resistant, but I think it was afraid of losing control. And basically, it thought, no, if you go down this sort of spiritual path, you're going to go off the rails, you're going to go off track, it's going to be a problem. And I really had to negotiate with my conscious mind, my rational ego mind, and say, no, I know your job is to keep me safe. You've done a really good job of that, help me navigate life on Earth. But there's something more. You work for me, I don't work for you, I think is the dynamic. And it was sort of, no, I have to stay in charge, I have to be in control. And I had to really say, no, this is my being, you need to step back, not go away, not disappear. In hypnosis, some people think that they'll be unconscious or unaware or forget what happens, and that it's not true. That's not what happens. We want mental mind present, but we don't want it holding onto the steering wheel. We want it to let go as much as possible, but be present so that it can learn. And by its presence, it's also a safeguard. It can step in and say, nah, I'm not ready for that, or I don't want to go there. So it's protective in nature. But in its effort to protect me, it was hindering me from listening, from really living the message, one of the big messages that I got during that time. And so it was willing to back off enough that I could then go into spirit and expand consciousness and be more the higher consciousness, the more objective consciousness that I am and that I could achieve without mental mind holding on so tight. And it really gives you a different perspective on life, on the purpose of life, and how you live it. Yeah, this program, I call it the big three. So there's, in our psychology, in our human nature, there are three big things that I think we all have to learn to recognize and to work with. And it's things that limit us, right? One is stored emotions. We have an emotional experience, and those emotions get lodged in our body. They stay in our psyche. So sad, angry, pain, whatever it might be, these emotions we hold. And when we carry these emotions, there are experiences we'll have during the day that will trigger them. And so instead of responding to what's happening in the moment, we're responding to things that have accumulated from the past. And the next is that when we have a strong emotional experience, we form a belief. It's my fault, I'm not good enough, some belief. And these are very real for us, even if they're untrue. Sorry. Maybe you want to cut that. Just give me a second. And in addition to these beliefs, we also form survival strategies. This is the program. It's things that we learn to do to stay safe and to get love and acceptance. And this program runs beneath our level of awareness. And you can do psychoanalysis, you can do psychotherapy, you can do other kinds of transformative trauma work and become aware of these, and then you can work on them, right? The thing that I didn't realize is that beyond the human personality of Paul Aurand, my soul, my spiritual being, has experiences over many lifetimes. And in addition to the wisdom and the knowledge and the experience of those lifetimes, my soul, my spiritual being, also carries stored emotions, beliefs, and survival strategies. And it's there that we need to do a lot of our work, because you can look at this life. It's hard to access memories from times pre-verbal when you're really young, and a lot of trauma comes from there in utero before we're even born as our body's developing. But the soul brings in with it emotions from the past, beliefs from the past, and survival strategies from the past. And they can really limit us in this life. And that's where past life regression and life between life regression have great value. It isn't just remembering, oh, I was this person, was I famous or whatever. No, it's working on much of the same things that we work on in this life through psychotherapy, but this is more of a soul therapy, really. I used to think the soul was perfect, and I still believe there's something perfect in our soul, spirit. But souls come to earth to learn. And what did I come here to learn? That's the question, right? What am I learning? What can I learn? What do I need to learn? People want to know what their purpose is. Like, what am I supposed to achieve in the world? And some of us come with great determination to achieve something. But there's also, the biggest element, I think, is what did we come in to learn? And am I learning it? Right? So when I did some of my own regression work, I saw 3 lifetimes, not in great detail, but sort of thematic. And 3 lifetimes of self-sacrifice, right? Which to me seemed like, oh, that makes me a great person. I can sacrifice myself for others. And in this life was repeating that. And when I did regression work and worked with my guides, they said, you've done this 3 lifetimes, and you're repeating again in this lifetime. Enough already. You have to change this. Look at your own self-worth, your own self-value. No more self-sacrifice. There was more to it than that, but that was the main theme. And even though I knew it, it took me months to steer the ship in a different direction because it was so ingrained. That's this program that you're saying Joe talks about, was sacrifice yourself, do give to others, do for others. And don't worry about yourself. You don't matter, sort of. And even when I understood the principle that I need to do that differently, it took me time to be able to do it, to live it. I got there, but it was real work. And it was so eye-opening to realize that our souls, too, need to learn and grow, and that's really why we come here.
Does it matter? Does it mean that our defaults are also our patterns. And when we have like a default course of action that feels comfortable for us, is that the place where we should be looking for the patterns that we probably would need to break?
Yes, but I would say it in a little different, in a different way. I would say when it feels selfish and when it feels wrong, like if you say no to someone. And for me, when I started to put myself first, it felt really wrong and really selfish. And that's how I knew I was on the right track, because it didn't feel natural. It felt natural to self-sacrifice. And to not do it felt dangerous and mean even, or wrong. And that was the first clues that, oh, okay, here I am on a new track now. I'm starting to get it. It didn't feel good. It didn't feel natural. It is good that I could learn to do that. That was really necessary learning, and it took me, as I said, lifetimes to get there. But how I knew I was on track was when it felt unnatural. Yeah, so it's really, there's something we call breaking trance, right? My wife is really good at it. We do the same work. That's how we met, really. You walk into the post office, and the poor postal worker behind the plexiglass has been dealing with grumpy people all day, and in New York, you can have a whole transaction and never have any eye contact and never anything personal. And she'll ask them, well, how are you feeling today? And they don't even hear it at first. And she'll ask a second time, and then maybe they look up and, why are you asking that? Sort of, you know? Well, just wondering. It must be a long day, and you have a lot of grumpy people. Oh, and then there's a kind of breaking them out of this bubble or this shell. And now you have a little bit of interpersonal or human contact, and it can really make a person's day. And so I think that one of the themes that we're aware of is, as you go through your day, help break that pattern of just repetitive programming, and people start to wake up again. I think it's, in an indirect way, really helpful, as well as being kind. You know, saying no didn't come really natural to me either, but I think it's one of the first steps in our personal growth, but also in our soul growth. We do a workshop on finding your no. I have it in my book, Essential Healing. And yeah, so one of the survival strategies is being the pleaser, is making other people feel comfortable, other people feel good. But what's it doing to you when you don't say no, when you don't set a boundary? How much of yourself do you give? How much do you sacrifice? And then do you end up feeling resentful, angry, taken advantage of, kind of lose some of yourself? And so I don't think it has to be done in a mean or a cruel way, but I think it's a real theme, is learning to say no and finding that boundary and setting that boundary. It's beneficial for other people, even if they don't like it at first, because if you've been a pleaser and have people around you they're used to taking and not being told no, and you start saying no, it's confusing for them. But I think that's, in the end, I think that's a good thing, rather than just repeating it.
What would be the signs to tell that this could be helpful to us?
I think if you become aware of yourself in a repetitive pattern, you know, you keep repeating the same sort of thing, whether it's financially or in relationship or in health, right? And you feel stuck with it, you can't do it different or break out of it, then I think regression work can be really beneficial, to go back and explore, where did you learn to behave this way? Where did you learn that it was better or safer to not say no, to say yes when you really mean no? There's some place, some experience or a series of experiences where you learn that. You either learned it in childhood, or you picked it up in utero, in the womb, or you learned it in a past life, You said no to someone that didn't like it and they killed you. Or you learned it as a child that it was dangerous to say no. You just had to agree or pretend you liked it, or it was better to try to please and make peace in the family or in life. And so you knew it was dangerous. But I think that regressing back to not just remember the incident or the series of experiences, but to explore, well, what is it you're afraid would happen if you did say no? They won't like me anymore. I'll be abandoned. I'll be beat. I'll be killed. I'll be punished, right? We all have these experiences to one degree or another. And without great consciousness, we've chosen these survival strategies, and then they run like a program beneath the level of our awareness. So going back to do two things: to bring awareness to it, because once you're aware, it's harder to keep repeating it, but you also need to resolve that in some way and say, okay, so that was true back then, that if you said no, it would be a problem, but now it's a problem because you're not saying no. And it's actually safer to say no. You need to put some new awareness, some new program in there as well that's more beneficial now. A lot of our survival strategies, mine was be responsible, make other people feel good at your own expense, right? I learned that around 9, 10 years old. Take care of my brother and sister, make my mother feel better, because if she doesn't feel better, then we're really in big trouble. She's all stressed out, and now I'm trying to comfort her. It's not a 9-year-old's job. And somehow that 9-year-old that was desperate to make mom feel better lived very strong in me. That was my program. And so when I was in a relationship as an adult and things weren't going well, that 9-year-old was freaking out, thinking the world's going to come to an end if I don't make this better somehow. And instead of trying to change my partner or behave differently, the real answer was to go in and connect with that 9-year-old me that was desperate and say two things, really. It's not your fault. It's not your responsibility. And the world, well, it's three things. And the world's not going to come to an end. You don't have to do it. It's over. All that back there, it's over. And then I could be the adult man in the relationship again and go, okay, and not try to fix it, and not walk into the meat grinder or the windmill again, and not be so desperate. I could be a more mature adult and handle the situations. Even say, I'm going to come back in 10 minutes or in a bit when things are calmer and we can talk about it. Rather than, oh no, if I don't fix this, the world will come to an end. So that was hugely powerful to go back in regression and connect with the 9-year-old. Do what we call reparenting, tell him, look, I'm an adult now, I can handle it, you don't have to. It just took the pressure off. And so a lot of regression work is in this life. Even people who come for past life regression, often a lot of the work is in this life, before we even get to past life, and resolve it there. And then if there's something we brought in with us, then we can work on it.
It feels, when I hear you talk about this, it feels like there, in this detachment, there's also a lot of pressure that comes off. That's almost unseen pressure, right? If we're in an argument with our loved one, we don't see the pressure that's pushing us to behave in a certain way, but that always exists. And the way we're acting, the things we're saying, the actions we're taking, they're very much derived from that pressure and from us feeling like we'd have no other choice and we need to force our way into the actions that are familiar. Mm-hmm. But when we look at it with detachment, we're able to see there's so much pressure that we're able to take off every interaction that we have.
That's the stuck emotions. That's this reservoir of fear or anger or pain or whatever it might be that we carry within ourselves. Yeah? And so one of the questions we ask ourselves is, if I'm being kind to you, for instance, is it to try to please you? Is it coming from fear? that if I don't behave nicely, you won't like me, or I'll be abandoned, or I'll be hurt? Or is it coming from love? We have reservoirs of both within us. I mean, the regression work isn't all pain and trauma. Some of it is regressing back to the natural resources we have within us of kindness, love, awareness, spiritual consciousness, really more of our soul self. It's a way to gain access to that too after we sort of have become earthlings or more human beings rather than the spiritual being that we are. So it's retrieving the gifts of great inner wisdom, strength, and power as well. That's something beyond our ego or our wounded ego or our human personality.
So, in your own experience, could you share more about, fighting with this why? I mean, you've had this profound experience. What was your thought patterns, and at which point do you notice that the why question becomes counterproductive? You need to sort of stop asking it and continue to live your life.
I think it's important to reflect on things that happen in our lives, and it's natural to ask why. When I got hit by lightning, that was a big question for me for a long time. Why did I get hit by lightning? And it wasn't until I stopped asking why and started asking what can I learn from it, how can I grow from it, that I got unstuck. And as long as I held the why, there were many people who told me why I got hit by lightning, right? Even unsolicited. Well, that's because of that weird work you do. You're being punished. God is whacking you up the side of the head, someone said to me. I had a well-known spiritual religious leader tell me, it's because you didn't donate enough to my cause. Another person said, oh, the devil is after you. Someone else said, oh, it's a shamanic initiation. There are Native Americans who try to get hit by lightning. They call them the backwards people, and they walk backwards after it because it's transformational, right? People offered all kinds of opinions. I wondered why too. And to this day, I can't tell you why I got hit by lightning. But I even went to a lightning strike, an electric shock support group. There is actually such a thing. And they talked to me about how much the trauma was going to affect my life. That I could easily have loss of eyesight, tumors, depression, suicidal thoughts. Yes, these things can happen, but from my perspective, that wasn't really a support group. That was a group that was really reinforcing the negative or terrible things that could come from such an experience. And again, I came back to, well, what can I learn from this? How can I grow from this? And began doing my own trauma work, really, to both release the trauma from my body and to recover the gifts. And I did a lot of different things. Some of them may be a little bit crazy, but it was really the regression work that helped both release the trauma that was stuck in my body and help me regain the gifts from it. So I think that we have an experience that we ask why, but I don't think that the answers or the resolution will come from that. I think we have to look from a higher perspective and say, well, what can I gain from this, or what can I learn from this, or what do I need to change in my life? Then it's not really coming from such a place of fear as were most of the reasons people were telling me, or even some of the things I was thinking myself. I think it really frees you to move beyond the why and what can I gain from this? What can I learn from this? How can this benefit me or other people? I think that it's natural when someone around you has trauma, has is experiencing loss to want to make them feel better. And I would encourage people to resist that urge to offer advice or make them feel better. Be with them, sit with them, care, listen. You know, when after the lightning strike and after we lost our son, I didn't need advice from people. I didn't need to be told why or what I should do or time will heal it or all these platitudes. They really made me more angry than anything. It was the person that didn't say anything and just sat there with me and let me cry, or let me be in my pain and not try to make it any different. Just the caring, the loving, the presence, the listening, I think were really, in the beginning anyway, were really the most important thing. And then in time helping me explore my feelings and my experience without making them wrong, but just listening and mirroring or reflecting back, helping me explore it on my own, really. Just their caring presence and willingness to listen and let me go through my process rather than cheering me up or encouraging me or telling me that it'll be better in time. Because, yeah, as time passes, it's less painful, but it doesn't go away. You gain a different perspective, you process some of it, and continue. You learn what you can, and go on from there. But it's a real process, and these well-meaning words of advice or encouragement, especially soon after a loss, aren't helpful, really.
So Paul, for whoever listened to this session and wants to know more about you and wants to find you online, what's the best way they can connect with you?
My website is really the best way, paul@paulaurand.com. And I do have a book that's available both as an audio book where I read the practices, because there are about 50 practices in there for developing yourself. And it's in print, and it's called Essential Healing. You look up Essential Healing in my name, you'll find it. It's available in English, and it's available in Spanish, and it's available as an audiobook as well. And email is a good way to get me. Thank you. And thank you for doing this. It's so wonderful that you're bringing this to the world and inviting people like me to be here on your show, and for getting it out there. Thanks.